I mean, it is legal. I mean, in England, doctor prescribed that mebendazole for cancer treatment.
It's not the only drug being used to treat an illness that it wasn't originally intended for. But for some people, using old drugs for new treatments or repurposing can be the difference between life and death. Melanie Kennedy, mother of 2 young boys, was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2013. It soon spread to her liver. She was given 5 years to live. Through a private health clinic, Melanie began a course of treatment using repurposed drugs, while continuing conventional chemotherapy with the NHS. The clinic recommended she take an antibiotic called doxycycline, metformin, usually used to treat type 2 diabetes, a statin or cholesterol-lowering drug, and mebendazole, a worming agent. All these drugs were designed for other purposes, but may have anti-cancer properties. After a 2-year course of chemotherapy, along with repurposed drugs, her scans are showing no new evidence of disease.
Okay, thank you very much for your time with us, Dr. Bannister. Can I call you Dr. Bannister?
Pleasure.
Right. Can you just say hello to Korean cancer patient and their family?
Hello everybody. I hope you can get some benefit from the advances that we're making at Care Oncology Clinic.
Right. Please tell us, the to Korean audience, what kind of hospital is Care Oncology Clinic?
So, Care Oncology Clinic isn't really a hospital. It's a treatment centre. It doesn't have beds or anything. We first set Care Oncology up in 2013, and it was to provide an adjunctive treatment. That means an additional treatment to what patients get in the normal treatments for cancer. It's not a hospital, it doesn't have beds, it's a clinic, and patients come to the clinic. They are assessed and informed about the Care Oncology Clinic protocol, and if suitable, they then go home, and we arrange for the drugs to be shipped to them, and they can then start taking these medications alongside, and most importantly, alongside their normal standard of care, which they get from the National Health Service, such as chemotherapy, radiotherapy, hormone therapy, and most modern immunotherapy. And then what happens is those patients are carefully monitored by our clinicians, because cancer patients are very sensitive. They're obviously taking some really quite dramatic medications in terms of the standard of care treatments, chemotherapy, and so on. And these have lots and lots of side effects. So we monitor our patients very carefully to ensure that the Care Oncology protocol, which is made up of very safe, very well-used drugs, doesn't add at all to their side effect burden. So those patients are then monitored, and every 3 months, which is in line with the kind of scanning protocol that many cancer patients have here in the UK, they are reassessed, and if necessary, their Care Oncology protocol is modified in line with the change in status of their cancer or their treatments or any side effects that they are experiencing. So it's not a hospital, it's a treatment clinic. Patients are monitored very closely, and the treatments that we offer are adjusted in light of any changes that they're experiencing.
And I understand that you are specialized in off-label drugs.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Off-label drugs, often called repurposed drugs. This opportunity arises because many drugs are simply not specific. They have many activities. And although a drug may be originally used for one indication, it often finds usefulness in other indications. And when I first set up Care Oncology Clinic in 2012-13, around there, I really needed to look for repurposed medicines and medicines that didn't have a normal cytotoxic profile.
Right.
And that's what I found, a range of drugs that had mechanisms that I was very interested in that could be used in an adjunctive way. And I was also looking for medicines that would be safe to use in cancer patients as well. That is of utmost importance.
Right.
And of course, drugs that have been on the market for a very long time, we know a great deal about them in terms of their safety, and also importantly for these medications in terms of their safety alongside cancer treatments for their normal historical use. So yes, it's all about repurposed off-label medications.
Korean people, I mean, especially interested in anthelmintic drug, like you use mebenda졸.
Yes.
What is theory
Yes.
behind that anthelmintic drug in treatment of cancer?
Okay. So we use mebenda졸,
Right.
which is a human medicine. It is, in many ways, it's a fairly typical, classical, ordinary drug. It's a small molecule. It's very flat.
Right.
It is a drug that has, because of its small nature and its flat nature, it has many biological interactions. It fits into many different enzymes, fits into many different receptor pockets. Many of the Korean listeners, viewers will understand about lock and key mechanisms and enzymes and all of these sorts
Right.
of things. Well, mebendasolol acts in many different ways. In fact, lots of small drugs do that. Aspirin is probably one of the best examples of a small drug that has a very wide activity, doing lots of things. So when lots of people look at what does mebendasolol do, they will undertake some studies. And what people find is that mebendasolol appears to inhibit angiogenesis. Angiogenesis is the making of new blood vessels that are necessary for tumors to feed. And if you inhibit angiogenesis, you can slow up or stop the growth of tumors. Other people look at mebendasolol and they say, hey, look, mebendasolol inhibits tubulin. tubulin is a vital part in mitotic cell division,
Right.
which of course is very important for tumor growth. And people say, well, mebendazole inhibits tubulin. Other people say, hey, look, mebendazole inhibits apoptosis, or rather increases apoptosis, so cancer cells die very much more quickly through that mechanism. And yet others will say, hey, look, what mebendazole is doing is inhibiting an enzyme called PARP. PARP is an enzyme that cancer cells use to repair damaged DNA. So it helps cancer cells survive, and inhibiting PARP is a way of making cancer cells survive less well when they're insulted with chemotherapy or radiotherapy. So lots of people invoke lots of mechanisms for mebendazole, and I suspect, at least in part, it reflects their own research interest. Those people interested in angiogenesis find something with angiogenesis. Those people with tubulin, hey, it does tubulin or apoptosis or PARP. But what interested me about mebendazole when I was first looking was its original mechanistic activity in an enzyme called pyruvate kinase. Mm-hmm. So pyruvate kinase is a part of the glycolytic process, which is the way that cancer cells abstract energy from glucose, which is different to the way that normal cells access energy. And it attracted me, this particular mechanism, because it sits nicely alongside the other mechanisms of the other agents that we use at Care Oncology Clinic. So I was initially attracted to it because it was associated with metabolism of cancer cells, and in particular the Warburg process and glycolysis. But at the end of the day, these are only mechanisms that people look at and think that, well, mebendazole may act through these. What is really the important thing is, does mebendazole have any part to play in the treatment of cancer, and how do you use it? The mechanisms, to some extent, are a way of almost retrospectively justifying why mebendazole has some activity, which it appears to do.
How effective do you think that mebendazole, in treatment of cancer, is applied to all kind of cancer as well?
Really interesting question. How effective could that be? And I think the answer to this is you have to look at the way that cancer treatment is administered these days. There really isn't a golden bullet. Mm-hmm. People look at every new invention with a renewed hope that maybe this chemotherapeutic agent or this particular regime will treat all cancers, will be a super effective agent, a golden bullet, if you like, or a magic bullet is the word, isn't it? But every one of these has failed in this regard. So I think it's wrong to think about any individual agent, mebendazole included, as a standalone treatment. So the question is perhaps best framed as, how effective could mebendazole be when it is used in a combination regime? And we chose to investigate mebendazole in our clinic in a combination regime of other medicines, this Care Oncology Clinic protocol, which are all designed to act upon the preferred metabolic processes of cancer cells. And in this regard, I think it's quite effective. In our study, which is a preliminary study with preliminary data, we have published that patients with glioblastoma undertaking our protocol, that's 4 drugs, alongside standard of care. So it's really quite a complex, complicated regime, appear in this preliminary study to have a very substantial increase in life expectancy. So I think the answer to the question, how effective is mebendazole, is
monotherapy.
you have to consider it in combination.
Right.
And when you consider it in combination with sympathetic medications like ours, looking at the metabolic axis, alongside standard of care, as part of that regime, it appears to be, at least from initial studies, quite effective.
Right. What about just mebendazole monotherapy? Could be effective as well?
Yeah. Hang on. So mebendazole monotherapy, well, in line with my previous answer to that, I think it's unlikely to be effective. You know, when I first started investigating the care oncology protocol, that is, what drugs is it that I wanted to use in the care oncology protocol,
Right.
I started to look at the entire pharmacopoeia. That's all the drugs that have been administered to man that we could potentially use in a protocol. And I didn't expect, when I was doing that literature review, to find drugs that were potently cytotoxic in the literature. Those would stand out as potent cytotoxics, clearly, by definition. And mebendazole clearly isn't one of those.
Right.
It isn't a drug that people associate with massive cytotoxicity on its own and massive chemocytotoxicity on its own. So my assessment would be, I don't think mebendazole as a monotherapy has a part to play in the treatment of cancer. And that is why we at Care Oncology Clinic always use these metabolic medications alongside standard of care, which is where we see the effectiveness of the medications.
Right. It'd be great. I mean, it is legal. I mean, in England, you know, doctor prescribed that mebendazole for cancer treatment.
Is it what? Sorry.
Is it legal? I mean, is it?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. The Care Oncology Clinic in the UK is run under the guidance of the CQC, which is a governmental body that looks at the way that clinics operate and do they provide safety for patients and so on and so forth. It is also, but we're also running a study under the guidance of the MHRA, which is another government body that is responsible for looking both at the safety of patients and also the data integrity of any trials that they are involved in. And also our doctors are regulated by the GMC, the Medical Council of the UK. So absolutely, in our country, yes, these sorts of off-label drugs can be administered to patients if in the consideration of the doctors there is no or limited alternative to them. And in this sense, that is absolutely the case because these are all cancer patients with advanced disease.
And I just wonder if there are other hospital or doctors who prescribe that the mebendazole for, you know, cancer treatment, except COC.
I think, yes, sure. I think there are.
Right.
There are lots of patient help websites, and there are lots of doctors that look, at least in part, at the sort of things that we're doing and the effectiveness of these medicines, and will prescribe these alongside other things of their interest. What I think separates us from other clinics is that we have developed a protocol where we have 4 drugs that we think all act on different aspects of the the unique metabolic processes of cancer cells. And in this way, positively influence cancer outcomes. And we are unique, I think, in being a cancer clinic that is passionate about publication of its results in order that we can change the way that cancer treatment is delivered for everybody in the world.
Dr. Bannister, let's talk about the COC protocol. I mean, you prescribed the four drugs, off-label drugs to cancer patients.
Yes.
Are they applied to all kind of cancers, like lung cancer, ovarian, pancreatic, liver, bilineary tract, or prostate, thyroid, something like that? Or is there any different kind? You're using different kind of dose?
A really good question.
Right.
Yeah. So when I was looking to the investigation of what ultimately became the Care Oncology Clinic protocol, I wasn't expecting to find drugs that were specific to certain cancers. What I really wanted to do was to look at a set of drugs that could work along many cancers. And that was my initial ambition. I was astounded, so surprised to find in the literature the work by a very famous scientist now, I think, called Otto Warburg in the very early 1900s. And what he described was that cancer cells abstract and use the energy that they get, abstract and use energy from the body in completely different ways to normal cells. And this is the difference between oxidative phosphorylation, which occurs in the mitochondria of all cells, and glycolysis, which is predominantly the mechanism by which cancer cells abstract and use energy from the body. And it's massively preferred by cancer cells. And it is common to all cancer types, regardless of their tissue of origin. It is a really fundamental process. So understanding that scientific principle led me to believe that if we can inhibit the metabolic processes, these unique metabolic processes of cancer cells, we could, at least in principle, impact all cancer types. That astounded me when I found that out, because that's 100 years ago. And it's now 100 years later that people are starting to consider that metabolic processes really are important in cancer treatment. But what has happened in the intervening time is that people have gone back and looked at these old medications that we have looked at. So when I started to look for the COC protocol, there was a lot of research that had already been done in many cancer cell lines, in many test tubes, in many animals, in many small clinical studies, patient observation studies, and indeed very large epidemiological studies. And all of this really pointed towards Warburg being right. And so with that, we set up Care Oncology Clinic with a view to seeing if we could pull out this in meaningful clinical data across many different cancer types. And glioblastoma is the first of these that we have demonstrated this in. And we do anticipate other clinical papers in due course when we have the appropriate patient numbers. So yes, mechanistically and also from the data, I believe metabolic drugs have a part to play in treatment of all cancer types, regardless of tissue of origin.